My name is Victoria Sterling, and despite building a multi-million-dollar legal practice before 30, I was never enough for my family. But that Christmas morning when I watched my aunt slip my grandmother's engagement ring onto her finger like it was always hers to take, everything changed. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. I should start by telling you about Grandma Rose's ring. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a 1920s Art Deco masterpiece. A 3-carat emerald surrounded by diamonds that had traveled from Dublin to Boston in my great-grandmother's coat pocket. Rose Sterling had worn it for 62 years of marriage. Through the Depression, 2 wars, and raising 5 children in a cramped apartment above my great-grandfather's butcher shop, the ring represented everything I thought I understood about my family. Resilience, love that lasts, and the promise that some things are sacred enough to pass down unchanged. My name is Victoria Sterling, and I'm 31 years old. I live in Burlington, Vermont, where I run Sterling & Associates, a boutique law firm specializing in estate planning for New England's old money families. Ironic, considering how my own family's estate would later implode. But I've always been good at protecting other people's legacies, even when I couldn't protect my own. Growing up, I was what you might call the investment child. My parents, Richard and Margaret Sterling, had 3 daughters, but I was the one they groomed for greatness. Piano lessons, debate team, early admission to Dartmouth, then Harvard Law. Every achievement was celebrated, but always with the underlying expectation that I owed them something in return. My sister. Carolyn was the free spirit, art school dropout turned yoga instructor, living in a converted barn in rural Maine with her partner Jessie and their rescue goats. She was the disappointment, which paradoxically made her the favorite. My parents worried about her constantly, which translated to attention, sympathy, and endless financial bailouts. My youngest sister Emma was the perpetual child, 36 but still living at home, drifting between part-time jobs and expensive hobbies that my father funded without question. She collected vintage guitars she couldn't play and enrolled in graduate programs she never finished. Then there was Aunt Patricia, my father's sister and a family vulture. Patricia had married well twice, divorced even better, and spent her considerable free time managing everyone else's business. She lived in a restored Victorian mansion in Stowe, drove a white Range Rover, and had the supernatural ability to arrive uninvited at every family gathering with opinions nobody asked for and wine nobody wanted to drink. The family dynamics were clear. Caroline was the tragic artist they needed to save. Emma was the baby they needed to protect. And I was the successful one who needed nothing, which meant I got nothing, not attention, not sympathy, and certainly not the kind of unconditional love that came without performance metrics attached. But Grandma Rose was different. She lived with us from the time I was 12 until she passed last spring at 94. Rose saw through the family's careful casting of roles. She knew I was drowning in expectations while my sisters floated on excuses. Victoria, she told me once while we sat on the back porch shelling peas, you have your great-grandfather's hands built for holding on to what matters. Don't let them convince you that strength is the same thing as not needing anything. Those Tuesday afternoon conversations were my anchor. Rose taught me about the family history that never made it into Christmas dinner stories, the relatives who'd fought for workers' rights, the grandmother who'd hidden Jewish neighbors during the war, the great-aunt who'd run for mayor of Boston in 1952 and lost by 12 votes. The ring, she'd say, twisting it on her arthritic finger, goes to the granddaughter who understands what it means to stand your ground. I thought I understood. I thought she meant me. Rose passed away on a Tuesday in April, quietly in her sleep after spending Monday evening teaching Emma how to make her famous Irish stew. The funeral was beautiful, overflowing with flowers, packed with neighbors and old friends, exactly the kind of send-off Rose would have appreciated. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. I took time off from work, something I rarely did, because I wanted to be present for whatever. Rose had decided I expected some family heirlooms, maybe a few $1,000s, and hopefully some indication that she'd noticed how hard I tried to be the granddaughter she deserved. The meeting was held at Murphy and Sons, the same law firm that had handled my grandmother's affairs for 30 years. We gathered in there. Conference room, my parents, my sisters, Aunt Patricia, and Uncle Michael, Patricia's current husband, all sitting around a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars. James Murphy Jr. cleared his throat and began reading Rose's surprisingly detailed will. She'd left the house to my parents, which made sense. Her savings, about $80,000, was to be split equally among her 3 granddaughters. Again, fair and expected. Then came the specific bequests to my granddaughter Caroline. I leave my collection of first edition poetry books and my hope that she finds the courage to write her own. Caroline started crying. The poetry books were valuable, but more than that, it showed that Rose had paid attention to Caroline's secret dream of becoming a writer. To my granddaughter Emma, I leave my piano and the music box that belonged to my mother, with the understanding that some songs are worth learning, even if you start late, Emma gasped. She'd always loved that music. Box, a delicate thing that played Danny Boy when you wound it up. My heart was pounding. What would Rose leave me? What message would she have for the granddaughter who'd spent every Sunday afternoon for 20 years, learning her stories and listening to her wisdom? To my granddaughter Victoria, I leave my wedding ring, my engagement ring, and my mother's pearl necklace, along with my deepest gratitude for the Tuesdays we shared. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by something deeper, validation. Rose had chosen me to carry forward the most precious family symbols. The rings represented generations of love and commitment. The pearl necklace had been worn by my great-grandmother at her wedding in County Cork, but then James Murphy kept reading. However, as Victoria has achieved considerable financial success and independence, and as my daughter-in-law Patricia has expressed great admiration for these pieces over the years, I believe they would bring more joy to Patricia, who has always appreciated beautiful things. The words hit me like ice water. I looked around. The table, seeing my family's faces carefully arranged in neutral expressions. Patricia was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, murmuring something about being so touched and never expecting such generosity. Therefore, Murphy continued, I am leaving the engagement ring, wedding ring, and pearl necklace to my daughter-in-law Patricia Sterling, with my love and appreciation for the years of kindness she has shown our family. The silence in the YMD room was deafening. I felt like I was falling through space, trying to understand what had just happened. Rose's rings, the symbol of everything we talked about, the tangible connection to our family's history, were going to Patricia. Patricia, who visited maybe 6 times a year and spent most of those visits complaining about Rose's old-fashioned decorating and peculiar habits. I'm so sorry, Victoria, Patricia said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. I know how much the rings meant to you. Maybe we can work out some arrangement where you can borrow them for special occasions. Borrow? She wanted me to borrow my grandmother's rings for special occasions. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to say something, to acknowledge how wrong this felt. My father was studying his hands. My mother was whispering something comforting to Patricia about how overwhelming it must be to receive such a meaningful gift. Nobody was looking at me. Is there any way to contest this? I asked Murphy quietly. He shook his head. The will is very clear and was updated just 3 months ago, Mrs. Sterling was of sound mind and made these decisions deliberately. Updated 3 months ago, which meant Rose had originally planned to leave me the rings, then changed her mind. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. Patricia promised to take excellent care of the jewelry and suggested we all go to lunch to celebrate Rose's memory properly. I excused myself, claiming I had client meetings, and drove back to Burlington in a daze. That night, I called Carolyn. I don't understand it either, she admitted. Rose always talked about you wearing her ring someday. Remember how she used to make you try it on when you were little? I did remember. Rose would slide the emerald ring onto my thin finger, and it would spin around too big but somehow perfect. Someday, little one, she'd say. But every Tuesday afternoon, when I would have normally been visiting Rose, The absence felt like a physical ache. I catch myself driving toward my parents' house before remembering she wasn't there anymore. It was during one of these aimless drives that I decided to stop by Murphy and Sons. James Murphy Jr. had been kind during the will reading, and something about the way he'd hesitated when I asked about contesting the will made me think there might be more to the story. His secretary told me he was between appointments, and he agreed to see me for a few minutes. I can't stop thinking about the timing, I told him. Why did Rose change her will 3 months before she died? She never said anything to me about reconsidering the inheritance. Murphy looked uncomfortable. Victoria, sometimes elderly clients have reasons for their decisions that aren't immediately apparent to family members. What kind of reasons? He was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his professional obligations against something else. Your grandmother came to see me in January. He finally said. She was upset about something. She said she'd learned information that made her reconsider some of her bequests. What kind of information? I can't share specifics of our conversations, but I can tell you that she spent considerable time asking about the legal implications of leaving valuable items to someone who might not have the relationship to the family. That she'd previously believed. My blood ran cold. What does that mean? Murphy leaned forward slightly. Victoria, did you ever have any reason to question your parentage? The question hit me like a physical blow. My parentage? Are you suggesting I'm not my father's daughter? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply telling you that your grandmother seemed to have concerns about family relationships that influenced her decision-making process. I left Murphy's office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. The drive back to Burlington was a blur of racing thoughts and half-formed questions. Was it possible that Rose had discovered something about my parentage that changed how she saw me? But if I wasn't Richard Sterling's biological daughter, wouldn't that make me more deserving of her support, not less? That night, I did something I'd never done before. I searched through my parents' bedroom while they were at their weekly bridge game. I found the box of family documents in their closet, behind the winter coats that still smelled like my mother's perfume. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, old tax returns, and medical records from decades past. My birth certificate was there, listing Richard Sterling as my father and Margaret Ann Sterling as my mother, but tucked behind it was a hospital bracelet from Street. Mary's Hospital, dated 2 days after my birth, with a name that made my heart stop. Baby girl Morrison. Morrison was my mother's maiden name. Why would I have a hospital bracelet with that name instead of Sterling? I kept digging and found what I was looking for in an old manila envelope marked V Medical. Inside were pediatric medical records, vaccination schedules, and a letter from Dr. Robert Chun at the fertility clinic in Boston. The letter was addressed to my parents and dated 6 months before I was born. It discussed the successful implementation of artificial reproductive technology and reminded them about ongoing psychological support services for families pursuing third-party reproductive assistance. Third-party reproductive assistance. I read the letter 3 times before the meaning fully sank in. I wasn't just not Richard Sterling's biological daughter. I was conceived through artificial insemination with donor sperm. My parents had struggled with infertility for years before I was born. The miracle pregnancy my mother always talked about wasn't a miracle at all. It was medical intervention, using genetic material from a man whose identity I would likely never know. But there was more. At the bottom of the envelope was a handwritten note from my mother to my father, dated when I was about 5 years old. Richard Dr. Chen called about the records. V's donor, number 347, has Huntington's disease in his family history. 25% chance she carries the gene. We need to discuss genetic testing when she's older. The girls can never know about the donor situation until we understand the health implications. I sat on my parents' bedroom floor, surrounded by the documents that redefined my entire existence, and finally understood why Rose had changed her will. Someone had told her about the donor conception. Someone had convinced her that I wasn't really her granddaughter, that I didn't deserve the family rings because I didn't share the family blood, and I had a terrible suspicion about who that someone might be. I spent the next 6 months investigating my own family like a criminal case. I hired a private investigator to trace the paper trail around my conception and birth. I researched Huntington's disease and genetic testing options. I had my DNA tested through 3 different services, hoping to find some connection to the Sterling family line or to identify my biological father. The results confirmed what I already knew. I shared no genetic material with Richard Sterling, which meant I wasn't biologically related to Rose or any of the Sterling extended family. The Huntington's gene test came back negative, which was a relief, but it didn't change the fundamental reality of my situation. I also confirmed my suspicion about who had revealed the truth to Rose. The private investigator traced the leak to Patricia's divorce attorney from our second marriage. During that divorce, Patricia had tried to claim inheritance rights to Sterling family assets, arguing that her children from her first marriage deserved consideration as potential heirs to the Sterling estate. Her attorney had conducted a genealogical investigation that uncovered the fertility clinic records and my non-biological status. Patricia had known for years that I wasn't really a Sterling. She'd held on to that information like a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment to use it. The right moment turned out to be when Rose started talking about updating her will to reflect her grandchildren's different life circumstances. Patricia had visited Rose in January, a rare midwinter visit that should have been a red flag, and told her everything. But here's what Patricia hadn't counted on. I'm a lawyer who specializes in estate planning, and I know exactly how inheritance law works. Being adopted or conceived through donor sperm doesn't automatically disqualify someone from inheritance rights if they've been raised as a legal child of the family. Richard Sterling's name was on my birth certificate. He claimed me as his dependent for 31 years. I had been raised as his daughter with full legal recognition. More importantly, Rose's original will had explicitly named me as her granddaughter and designated me to receive her rings. The subsequent change to the will had been made under what lawyers call undue influence. Patricia had deliberately manipulated Rose's emotions and family loyalty to benefit herself financially. I had grounds to contest the will, strong grounds, but I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted justice. And I wanted my family to see exactly what Patricia had done to all of us. So I planned for Christmas. Our family always spent Christmas Eve at my parents' house, a tradition that had started when Rose moved in with them and continued even after her death. This year, I had a special gift in mind. I arrived early to help with dinner preparations, carrying a beautifully wrapped box that I placed prominently under the tree. When Patricia asked what it was, I just smiled and said, "Something I think will surprise everyone." The evening proceeded normally at first. Emma played Christmas carols on Rose's old piano, which now sat in the living room corner like a gentle ghost. Carolyn read a poem she'd written about Rose's garden. My parents bustled around, trying to maintain the holiday magic while navigating the first Christmas without their family matriarch. Patricia held court from Rose's favorite armchair, wearing the emerald ring on her right hand where it caught the light from the Christmas tree. She'd also draped Rose's pearl necklace over her burgundy silk blouse, creating an effect that managed to be both ostentatious and somehow wrong. Rose would have loved seeing her jewelry worn to celebrate Christmas. Patricia announced during dinner, twisting the ring so the emerald caught the candlelight. She always said beautiful things should be seen, not hidden away in jewelry boxes. Smiled and nodded and waited for the perfect moment. It came during gift exchange, when Patricia opened my present in front of the entire family. Inside the box was a leather portfolio containing photocopies of every document I'd discovered over the past 6 months: the fertility clinic correspondence, the hospital records, the genetic testing information, and most importantly, a detailed timeline showing exactly when Patricia had learned about my donor conception and when she'd shared that information with Rose. But the real gift was the cover letter I'd written, addressed to the entire family, explaining not just what Patricia had done, but why it mattered. Patricia's face went white as she read the first page. My parents looked confused, then shocked. "What Patricia didn't tell Rose," I continued, "is that legally, ethically, and emotionally, donor conception doesn't change family relationships. Richard is my father in every way that matters. You are my parents. Rose was my grandmother. And more than that, Rose's original decision to leave me her rings was based on 20 years of relationship, love, and shared Tuesday afternoons. I turned to look directly at Patricia, who was still clutching the documents. Patricia manipulated a 94-year-old woman's grief and confusion to steal a family inheritance. She used Rose's old-fashioned ideas about bloodlines and legitimacy to convince her to disinherit the granddaughter who'd spent the most time with her, who'd learned her stories, who'd been planning to name her own daughter Rose someday. Patricia finally found her voice. I didn't steal anything. Rose made her own decision. She had the right to know the truth about family relationships. You're absolutely right, I agreed. She did have the right to know, just like the family has the right to know what you did with that information. I reached into my purse and pulled out one more document, a petition to contest Rose's will based on undue influence, already filed with the court and scheduled for hearing in February. The legal system will determine whether Rose's decision was made freely or under manipulation, I said, but regardless of what the court decides, I want everyone in this room to understand what happened here. I stood up, smoothing down my dress, and looked around the table at my family, the people who had raised me, loved me, and disappointed me in equal measure. Rose's ring doesn't matter because it's worth money. It matters because it represents the promise that love is stronger than blood. That family is built on choice and commitment, not just genetics. Patricia took that promise and turned it into a weapon to exclude me from the family I've been part of for 31 years. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, my father spoke. Victoria, we had no idea what Patricia told. Rose, if you'd known, what would you have done differently? I interrupted. Would you have defended my place in this family? Would you have reminded Rose that I've been her granddaughter for 31 years, donor sperm or not? Or would you have decided that Patricia was right, that I don't really belong here? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I picked up my purse and coat. I'll be spending Christmas morning with Carolyn and Jesse in Maine. The court hearing is February 15th. Patricia, you might want to hire a lawyer. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. Merry Christmas, everyone. Rose would have been so proud to see how much her family values love and loyalty. The door closed behind me with a soft click that echoed like a gavel. The court hearing was scheduled for a cold Tuesday in February. Fitting, since Tuesdays had always been my day with Rose. I'd spent the previous weeks building my case with a thoroughness that had made my legal practice successful. I hired Margaret Chun, no relation to the fertility doctor, one of Vermont's most respected probate attorneys, to represent me. We assembled a compelling case based on 3 key arguments. First, Patricia had deliberately withheld information about my parentage for years, only revealing it when doing so would benefit her financially. This demonstrated calculated manipulation rather than genuine concern for family truth. Second, Rose's decision had been made during a period of grief and emotional vulnerability. Within weeks of learning information that fundamentally challenged her understanding of family relationships, her age and recent loss made her particularly susceptible to undue influence. Third, the original will had reflected decades of relationship building. Between Rose and me, the sudden change, based solely on genetic information rather than lived experience, represented a departure from Rose's established values and previous decision-making patterns. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source 2 weeks before the hearing. Carolyn called me with shocking news. I was cleaning out some of Rose's things in Mom and Dad's attic, she said, and I found something you need to see. She drove down from Maine that evening with a small wooden box that had been tucked behind Rose's sewing supplies. Inside the box was a letter addressed to me in Rose's careful handwriting. Dated just 2 weeks before she died, the letter began. My dearest Victoria, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone and you have learned about Patricia's cruelty. Regarding your inheritance, my hands were shaking as I continued reading. I want you to know that I changed my will because I was frightened and confused. Not because I stopped loving you or believing you belonged in this family. Patricia came to me with information about your conception that I had never suspected. She told me that keeping the rings in the family meant ensuring they stayed with real sterling blood. I was 94 years old, grieving the loss of my independence, and facing the reality of my own death. In that moment of weakness, I let fear override the love I had built with you over 30 years. I let Patricia convince me that genetics mattered more than all our Tuesday afternoons, all your kindness, all the ways you helped me feel connected to life, even as mine was ending. By the time I realized my mistake, I was too sick to change the will again, and too ashamed to face what I had done to you. I am leaving this letter in hopes that someday someone will find it and you will understand that my failure was not a reflection of your worth, but of my own human weakness. The ring belongs to you, Victoria, not because of blood, but because of love. Fight for it, not for the jewelry, but for the principle that family is built on choice and commitment, not accidents of genetics. Forgive an old woman's moment of cowardice. You are my granddaughter in every way that matters, and I should have been brave enough to defend that truth. All my love. Grandma Rose. Carolyn was crying as I finished reading. She knew, she whispered. She knew what she'd done and regretted it. The letter changed everything about the court case, but more importantly, it changed everything about my relationship with Rose's memory. She hadn't rejected me. She'd been manipulated and died regretting her decision on the morning of the hearing. I walked into the courtroom wearing Rose's pearl earrings, which Patricia had overlooked, and carrying a photograph of Rose and me from my law school graduation. Margaret Chun had advised me to bring visual reminders of my relationship with Rose. Evidence that our bond transcended genetics. Patricia arrived with her knee. Looking defensive and overdressed, my parents sat in the gallery. Officially neutral but clearly uncomfortable, Carolyn had driven down to support me, sitting in the front row with tears already building in her eyes. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Patricia's attorney argued that Rose had made an informed decision. The timing and method of revealing information about Victoria Sterling's parentage demonstrates calculated manipulation rather than genuine concern for family truth. Patricia Sterling deliberately waited until she could use this information to her financial advantage, which constitutes undue influence under Vermont probate law. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her final words. The court hereby invalidates the codicil changing Rose Sterling's original will. The engagement ring, wedding ring, and pearl necklace are awarded to Victoria Sterling as originally intended. Patricia's face crumpled. Margaret squeezed my hand. Carolyn was openly sobbing in the gallery, but Judge Frost wasn't finished. Additionally, this court finds that Patricia Sterling's manipulation of an elderly family member constitutes elder abuse under Vermont statutes. While Rose Sterling is no longer alive to press charges, this court is recommending that Adult Protective Services investigate Patricia Sterling's interactions with other elderly family members. The gavel came down. With a sound like thunder, 3 weeks later, I drove to Patricia's house in Stowe to collect Rose's jewelry. She'd been ordered by the court to surrender the pieces within 30 days, and I wanted to handle the exchange personally. Patricia's Victoria mansion looked smaller than I remembered. Its white paint slightly faded and its elaborate gingerbread trim in need of maintenance. I wondered if she'd been using Rose's jewelry as collateral for loans, a possibility that made my stomach turn. She answered the door wearing jeans and an old sweater, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. The confident, manipulative woman who'd held court from Rose's armchair was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely shaken. "I have the jewelry ready," she said quietly, leading me into her living room. The pieces were laid out in black velvet in a jewelry box that looked expensive and impersonal. Rose's engagement ring with its Art Deco emerald and diamond setting, the simple gold wedding band that had never left Rose's finger until the day she died, the strand of pearls that had been worn by generations of women in our family. "I want you to know," Patricia said as I carefully lifted each piece, "that I never meant for Rose to die regretting her decision. I thought she would be grateful to know the truth about family relationships." I looked at her closely, trying to determine whether her regret was genuine or just another manipulation. Patricia, you held onto information about my parentage for years. You could have told the family at any time, in any way that honored our relationships and allowed for honest conversation. Instead, you waited until you could use it as a weapon to disinherit me. That wasn't about truth. That was about greed. She was quiet for a moment, running her fingers along the edge of the jewelry box. I've been jealous of you for years, she finally admitted. You were everything I wanted my own daughters to be. Successful, stable, respected, and you made it look so easy, I think. I think I wanted to prove that you didn't really belong. That your success wasn't legitimate because you weren't really one of us. The honesty was startling, but it didn't change what she'd done. My success has nothing to do with genetics, Patricia. It has to do with 31 years of education, hard work, and yes, support from the family that raised me. The family I belong to regardless of sperm donors or blood tests. I closed the jewelry box and stood to leave. Will you ever forgive me? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, looking around the living room that was decorated with expensive antiques and fresh flowers that couldn't hide the emptiness of a house where no one felt truly at home. I don't know, I said honestly. But I hope someday you'll understand the difference between being related to someone and being family. I drove home to Burlington with Rose's jewelry beside me on the passenger seat. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and tried on the engagement ring for the first time since I was a child. It fit perfectly. I called Carolyn to tell her about the exchange with Patricia, and she drove down the next day to see Rose's jewelry in its rightful home. Do you think she really regrets it? Carolyn asked, holding the pearl necklace up to the light. I think she regrets getting caught, I said. But maybe that's enough. Maybe consequences can teach people things that conscience couldn't. We spent the evening looking through old photo albums, finding pictures of Rose wearing the jewelry at family celebrations over the years. In every photograph, she looked happy and proud, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her. She would have loved seeing you get the ring. Back, Carolyn said softly. She did see it, I replied, touching the letter that I'd framed and hung in my bedroom. She just didn't live long enough to fix what she'd broken. 6 months after the court hearing, I made a decision that surprised everyone. Including myself, I sold my law practice, not because I was running away or because the family drama had broken my spirit, but because Rose's letter had reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all the years of proving myself and exceeding expectations. Family is built on choice and commitment, not accidents of genetics, but it's also built on forgiveness, understanding, and the courage to create the relationships you actually want, rather than accepting the ones you've been assigned. I used the money from selling my practice to start something entirely new, a nonprofit organization called the Sterling Foundation, focused on supporting young people who'd grown up in non-traditional family structures, adopted kids, children of donor conception, kids raised by grandparents or extended family members. The foundation's mission statement read, "Family is not defined by genetics, but by love, commitment, and the daily choice to show up for each other." I had carried Carolyn as the foundation's creative director, putting her art background and sensitivity to good use designing programs and materials. Emma surprised everyone by asking to join as the events coordinator. Finally finding work that matched her scattered interests and genuine care for other people, my parents took longer to adjust to the new reality, but they eventually came around. My father wrote me a letter apologizing for not defending me more strongly during the will crisis. My mother started therapy to work through her complicated feelings about donor conception and family secrets. We had Sunday dinners now instead of the old Tuesday tradition, and slowly began building new ways of being family, ways that were more honest, more intentional, and less dependent on performing predetermined roles. Patricia moved to Florida 6 months after the court hearing, claiming she needed a change of scenery. I stared at the document, feeling the universe shift around me once again. All the years I'd spent thinking I was alone in my donor conception, that I was the only child in the Sterling family without genetic connection to our history. And now, I was looking at evidence of a sister I'd never known existed. "Have you done DNA testing?" I asked. She nodded and pulled out printed results from one of the genealogy websites. I've been trying to find family matches, but most people don't know about donor conception in their family history. So the connections don't make sense. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my own DNA results, printed years earlier during my investigation into Rose's will change. We compared the numbers in silence, both of us seeing the same thing, a 50% genetic match, indicating a half-sibling relationship. I have a sister, I said, more to myself than to Amanda. I have a sister, she repeated, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. That evening, I took Amanda to dinner at my favorite restaurant in Burlington, and we spent 4 hours sharing our stories. She'd grown up in Connecticut with loving adoptive parents who'd been open about her adoption, but had no information about her biological origins. She was a social worker drawn to helping children navigate family transitions, which now made perfect sense. She told me about growing up feeling different, about wondering if she had siblings somewhere, about the strange sense of incompleteness that had followed her through relationships and career choices. I always felt like I was looking for something, she said, but I didn't know what it was. Family, I said simply. You were looking for family. Over the following months, Amanda became a regular part of my life, and by extension, the Sterling family. Carolyn embraced her immediately, delighted to have another sister and another person who understood what it meant to feel like an outsider looking in. Emma was more cautious at first, but warmed up when she realized Amanda's presence didn't diminish her own place in the family. My parents struggled initially with the idea of another donor daughter, but they eventually welcomed Amanda with the same complicated love they'd always shown me, imperfect but genuine. The most beautiful moment came at Thanksgiving that year. When Amanda joined us for the Sterling family dinner, she sat between Caroline and me, wearing Rose's pearl earrings that I'd given her as a welcome to the family gift. During the blessing, my father said something he'd never said before. We're grateful for the family we've built together, not just the family we started with. We're grateful for second chances, for forgiveness, and for the reminder that love makes us related, not just genetics. Amanda squeezed my hand under the table, and I thought about Rose, about her letter, about the ring that had started this whole journey toward understanding what family really means. The Sterling Foundation grew beyond anything I'd imagined. Within 3 years, we were operating in 4 states, providing support groups, legal assistance, and educational resources for families dealing with adoption, donor conception, surrogacy, and other non-traditional family structures. Amanda joined the foundation as our family services coordinator, bringing her social work expertise and her personal understanding of family complexity. Together, we developed programs that helped families navigate the emotional challenges of genetic discovery, inheritance disputes, and identity questions. One of our most successful initiatives was called Tuesday Talks, support groups that met weekly to discuss family relationships, inheritance, and belonging. The name honored Rose in our old tradition, but the content was forward-looking, focused on helping people build the families they wanted rather than mourning the families they've lost. During one Tuesday talk session, a young man named David shared a story that sounded familiar. My grandmother left everything to my aunt. He said, even though I'd been taking care of her for 2 years, my aunt told her I wasn't really family because I was adopted. So I didn't deserve the inheritance. The room went quiet, and I felt that old familiar anger rising in my chest. What happened next? I asked gently. Nothing, David said, shrugging. My aunt got the house, the money, everything. I couldn't afford to fight it in court, and I didn't think anyone would believe that my grandmother really wanted me to inherit. After the session, I asked David to stay behind. Would you be interested in legal representation? I asked. Pro bono? I'd kept my law license active specifically for cases like this. The Sterling Foundation had a legal aid component that handled inheritance disputes for families, dealing with adoption and donor conception discrimination. 6 months later, David successfully contested his grandmother's will and recovered the house that had been his home for most of his childhood. More importantly, he'd learned that legal family relationships can't be invalidated by genetic prejudice, and that there are people willing to fight for the principle that family is built on love, Not just biology, these victories felt like honoring Rose's memory in the way she would have wanted, by ensuring that other families didn't have to endure the manipulation and rejection that had nearly destroyed ours. 4 years after Rose's death, I met someone who understood complicated family relationships without needing lengthy explanations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was a genetic counselor who worked with families navigating donor conception, adoption, and inherited disease risks. She was brilliant, kind, and refreshingly direct about the difference between genetic connection and meaningful relationships. We met at a conference on family law and genetic counseling, where I was speaking about inheritance rights, and she was presenting research on family identity formation. Even Patricia sent a baby gift, a small silver bracelet engraved with "Family is Love," along with a note expressing hope that the next generation would be raised with more wisdom and less prejudice than previous ones. On baby Rose's first birthday, I received a phone call that brought the story full circle in a way I never could have expected. The caller was James Murphy Jr., the attorney who had read Rose Sterling's will 7 years earlier. "Victoria," he said, "I have some news that I think will interest you. Patricia Sterling has died. She'd had a heart attack in her Florida retirement community." He explained she was 74 and had been in declining health for several months. "But that's not why I'm calling," he continued. "She left a will and you're mentioned in it." I drove to Murphy and Sons that afternoon, bringing Sarah and baby Rose with me. The law office looked exactly the same as it had all those years ago, but I felt completely different walking into that conference room. Patricia's will was short and to the point. She'd left most of her estate to various charities, but there was a specific bequest that made me catch my breath: to Victoria Sterling. "I leave my sincere apologies and the sum of $50,000 to be donated to the Sterling Foundation in memory of Rose Sterling, with the hope that this gift will help other families navigate inheritance disputes with more grace and wisdom than I showed." But there was more along with the check. Patricia had left a letter addressed to me personally. "Victoria," it began, "I have spent the last 7 years thinking about what I did to you and your grandmother, and I've come to understand that I was not just wrong, but cruel. I took an old woman's love for her granddaughter and turned it into a weapon against that granddaughter. I used Rose's grief and confusion to serve my own greed and jealousy. I robbed you of precious time with her, and I robbed her of the peace she deserved in her final months. I cannot undo the pain I caused, but I can acknowledge it fully and ensure that something good comes from my mistakes. The money I am leaving to your foundation represents every penny I received from Rose's estate, plus interest. I never spent $1 of that inheritance because it never felt like mine to spend. I hope your daughter grows up in a family that understands what I took too long to learn, that love makes people related, and greed makes them strangers. I am sorry, Victoria, truly and completely sorry. Patricia Sterling." I read the letter twice, then handed it to Sarah, who read it while bouncing baby Rose on her knee. "Do you forgive her now?" Sarah asked gently. I thought about it carefully, looking around the conference room where so much of his story had unfolded. "I think," I said finally, "that forgiveness isn't about her anymore. She did what she could to make amends. Forgiveness is about me choosing not to carry anger that serves no purpose and helps no one." James Murphy smiled. "Rose would have been proud of you," he said. "Rose was proud of me," I corrected. "She just got scared for a while, but her love was stronger than her fear, and that's what mattered in the end. Today is a Tuesday, and baby Rose is 3 years old. We spend Tuesday afternoons in the garden behind my parents' house, the same garden where I learned Rose Sterling stories about our family's hidden history of strength and rebellion. I teach my daughter to shell peas, to plant seeds, to understand that growing things requires patience and faith that invisible roots will eventually produce visible beauty. "Tell me about Great-Grandma Rose," she says, settling into my lap with the comfortable expectation of a familiar story. "Great-Grandma Rose," I begin, "believed that family is built on love, not accidents. She wore a beautiful ring that traveled all the way from Ireland, and she taught me that the strongest hands are the ones that hold on to what matters, even when other people try to convince you to let go. What matters most? Rose asks, a question she's learned will always get a good answer. Love matters most, I tell her. The choice to show up for each other, day after day, even when it's hard. The promise to see the best in each other, even when we make mistakes. The courage to build the family you want, not just accept the family you started with. She nods solemnly, as if she understands something important, then runs off to chase butterflies in the garden where 4 generations of women have learned about love, loss, and the revolutionary act of choosing your family every single day. I watch her play, wearing Rose Sterling's engagement ring on my left hand and her pearl earrings in my ears, carrying forward a legacy that finally means what it was always supposed to mean, that some promises are worth fighting for. Some love stories transcend genetics, and sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let other people's failures define your own capacity for love. The rain catches the late afternoon sunlight, and I can almost hear Rose's voice. That's my girl. Strong hands, built for holding on to what matters. I'm holding on to love, to family, to the Tuesday promise that some things are sacred enough to pass down unchanged and wise enough to grow with each generation that receives them. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away from people who refuse to see your worth and building the family you actually deserve. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments. Because sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever.